Well, good evening. It's so wonderful having such a full room at our art club, and I know exactly why, because we have Karel and Kathy and of course Wilhelm here, and I think an amazing subject to talk about, and I'm going to hand you over to them in a moment. Just to clarify a few things, the contents of the Starcke collection is all in the old gallery to my left. So I understand there's a little bit of confusion. Most of the pictures hanging in this gallery are from our current October art online sale. And we also have some jewelry pieces from our current jewelry sale. I just wanted to make that distinction. It is our last art club here in Johannesburg of the year, so those of you that have come to previous iterations, we're very grateful, and of course we'll continue them throughout next year, and they've been a wonderful success, although I have to say this is definitely the biggest crowd we've had all year. A few things to note. You would have seen next door a reproduction of an Irma Stern painting of Anna Starcke from 1964, I think, so 2 years before Irma dies in 1966. And I just wanted to draw your attention to quite a special painting sort of on the main wall as you walk in. I'm showing it to you because it's only here for about 48 hours. It arrived yesterday and it goes back to Cape Town tomorrow. It's a gorgeous painting by Irma Stern from 1946, that sort of golden period of Stern's output, that golden period really from the late 1930s through to the late 1940s, where she's doing all this incredible exotic traveling, where she's in Dakar and Senegal in 38, Zanzibar in 39, the then Belgian Congo in 1942, Zanzibar again in 45, and the Congo again more briefly in 1946. So to have a painting like that hasn't been documented as far as we are aware, it is very, very special, and as I say, it's in Johannesburg for 2 nights, so you're lucky enough to see it. Finally, we're always very grateful to Glenelly, who sponsor our wine for our club. So I hope you enjoyed, and we thank them very much. And I'm going to hand you over to now to Wilhelm, who's managed to put together this incredible sale of items. You'll notice there are no prices or anything yet. That's because they've just arrived. We haven't finished cataloguing everything. So you're also the first kind of to see it all. It'll all be catalogued in the coming weeks. And the catalogue will be available and published on our website probably around the 3rd or 4th of November, and the sale will take place on the 17th and 18th. But hand you over to Wilhelm. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Alastair. I met Anna Starcke in 2018 at the Durban Art Fair. I mounted an exhibition of 15 Irma Stern still lifes, and the walls happened to be painted pink. She loved the still lifes, of course, but she shrieked about the pink wall. She promptly invited me to dinner that evening. Everybody told me, don't you dare be a second late. I arrived and she lifted me up and down and said, you're 5 minutes early. Then the last time she was here by Strauss and Company was in May, and she viewed the legacy exhibition I mounted of Gerard Sekoto and Lena Hichu. And again, she was captivated by the art and the juxtaposition of those two artists, and lo and behold, the walls were also painted pink. I knew her for a good couple of years, but tonight I want to hand over to 2 people who've known her for decades. Kathy Berman from the 1990s and Karel Nel from the 1970s. Kathy will take us through Anna's life, what a wonderful, illustrious life she had, and Karel will talk about the African art collection. Kathy?
Thank you, Wilhelm. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. Thank you, Wilhelm. I have to say that extraordinary exhibition next door, you have curated with love, with passion. I think all of us, is that me being, I think those of us who have known Anna, and there are many of you in the room, would think that Anna's here, and she's here, but I wish she was here. But she's very here. Working on putting, let me go back a bit. Anna died on the 12th of August this year. She was 89 years old. I think many of you will remember Anna. You would have seen her at some point. If you were at a Strauss preview, you would have seen her. She was diminutive, but as small as she was, her shrieks were loud. And she would shriek with delight at whatever she saw that really tickled her fancy. But she had no inhibitions about shrieking equally loudly at anybody who offended her and making them know that. So that is just two facets of a woman about whom I'd like to share many, many, many facets. But I was thinking about those shrieks today and thinking how one day I was talking to her about anger management, because she was quite clear that if she didn't like something, she was clear about it. But when she loved fiercely, and those of us in the room who knew her, it was such beautiful, beautiful love, and so generous. But I remember talking to her about anger management, and she looked at me and said, "But Kathy, why wouldn't anybody lose their temper if they're angry? Why do they need to manage it?" And for me, that's Anna. There was no holding back. There were no words like boundaries weren't relevant for her. That's psychobabble for Anna. So I also need to give tribute to Anna before I start by saying that I am wearing Anna. You'll see the skirt in the presentation, but I've embellished it with some of my deep rural Chinese and Thai items that I've picked up over the years. But being a girl, I have to say that I made sure that I matched the walls. Okay, but her walls at home were always yellow. But so I've kept yellow dominant. Sorry about that. Okay, so Anna was born in 1936 in Germany, in pre-war Nazi Germany. I called this my talk Anna Vivacity. We have a WhatsApp group called Anna Vivacity, called Vivacity actually, which we started during COVID, because she was terrified that she would be alone. And actually, when I look back at my photographs, we were together a lot. We obviously disobeyed the rules. We wore masks, and we had birthday parties on the sidewalk in Killarney. But we saw a lot of each other. And a cornucopia doesn't quite cover what Anna was. It was more than a cornucopia. I'm starting with a few beautiful images of this extraordinary woman, vivacity of life. And everywhere she went, she delighted in what she did. She's standing there on the left in front of Karel's work, which was the center of her collection. It's not here, it has been sold. And the other one was one night when she was out with us. And I was thinking about, how do you encapsulate a woman like Anna? There's so many reflections, there's so many facets. Her home in Killarney was wall-to-ceiling mirrors, where there wasn't wall space and where there weren't those incredible shelves. So it's reflections and facets, and ChatGPT and I had a great discussion about how best to encapsulate her, and some of those will come up. But I think most importantly, Anna just celebrated life, often and loudly. This is one of the shots I took of her apartment once, okay? It changed, it shifted. There was always a new work somewhere, you had to notice it. She was quite disturbed if you didn't notice it. But it was difficult to really pick any particular work. And just to give you a sense of the enormity of that endeavor, when Anna finally, she would never say passed away, when she finally died, those of us who were close to her rushed in and started clearing out her apartment. Her apartment was a duplex in Killarney, and it was filled to the brim with everything that her life had been dedicated to, which you will see. So it was magazines, it was books, it was cookery books, it was art, it was... But everything was brilliantly curated. The magazines were all on the floor, but they were dated back to the 1980s. So the first thing we did when we started just trying to get through things was throw out the magazines, okay, which I'm really sad about, but the newspapers. 12 full skips in the first week. And they were hidden, they were there, but they were beautiful, so you didn't notice how extensive it was. And I've spent 4 weeks now doing what I've called the archaeology of Anna, because I've dug through the dust. But what I've found is just, it's unequal. I knew a lot of her story. I was going to do a documentary on her. I started it, and in her way she said, Kathy, Berman never gets anything done. Anna, I'm trying. But I don't think I could have done the documentary because she would have been on my shoulders. I wouldn't have been able to see what I've been privileged to see. So I was trying to encapsulate her. She was a feature writer, an econo-political strategist, an author, and a businesswoman. That's her career. A few labels. Her passions. She was a curator of people, art, experiences, objects, design, curiosities, food. She was indeed a tour de force, a polymath, there's no doubt, a bibliophile, an epicure, and a muse, and you'll see why I say the last. And for me, she was a provocateur, a mind tickler, a dinner party diva. She entertained at least twice a week, and she made beautiful food, which you'll see. It always had to be color-coded. Not coded, colorful, kaleidoscopic. She was a kaleidoscopic visionary. And here, GPT saved me. I wrote it all in, and chat came up with many options, but the 4 best I chose, which as descriptors were outrageous reality, iridescent fantasy, multifaceted futures, infinite delight. And here she is, where we always see her over the food table. Let me take you back. She was born, as I said, in 1936 in Germany, where she stayed on until 1955. And then she traveled through Europe, but this wasn't a backpacking tour after school. This is the only record I could find of her time over that period. So let me share 1 or 2 remembrances. The thing about Anna is she selectively shared with each one of us who's in the room who was close to her, so we might all have differing memories. I've certainly had to spend a lot of time trying to correlate the dates, because the dates have also been quite fluid. And for most of us, for all of us, she was ageless. It was only when she turned 80 with a big birthday that we finally knew her age. Until then, we had to guess that she'd grown up during the war. That's all we knew, okay? So she was born in a small town next to Frankfurt, Offenbach am Main, and the war broke out. And one of these memories that are enduring for me is that she spoke about how the war broke out, the bombings happened, and she had 2 elder sisters, but her mother took her to the border of France, where they slept in a barn, in a farm. And she said she remembered vividly was the word I was trying to say. She remembered vividly how the sounds of the aeroplanes disturbed her so, and she was a little thing, and she would sleep on her mother's stomach, on her mother's tummy, and she said her mother was an amply sized woman. And as the planes came by and Anna got terrified, she would bury her head between her mother's breasts and hide her ears with those voluminous breasts. They returned after the war, and she had some bittersweet memories about her. Her father had been a civil servant, so she grew up in a very humble home. Oh, you want me to talk closer? Sorry, you should have said so. Sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm still hearing it echoing badly, but you'll manage that. Okay. Sorry if you didn't hear me. It was all waffled anyway. So she speaks about the return of the Americans freeing the city, and has some strange memories of American soldiers handing out cigarettes to her older sister and sweets to herself, which she found somewhat disturbing. Off she went at the age of 18. She wasn't going to endure this any longer, and there was only one way to get ahead in life. She went and she got into hotels in Switzerland, France, and Norway. And she learned everything she needed to learn about making life beautiful for the most affluent. She returned in '56 and reconnected with her with her teenage crush, who was Helmut Starcke, the artist, and they agreed they were going to move together to somewhere where English was spoken. Going back to Norway, he wrote to her and said, "Come with me, woman, I'm going to South Africa." He had made his way up from being just an admin person into doing window dressing, and then finally was now a creative director with JWT and had a job offer from Lindsay Smithers in Cape Town. And so they set out and arrived in Cape Town in 1958, where she was the Beldingmond of the Berman. And by that we mean Tatler, where she writes and he illustrates. Vogue South Africa, and that was Tatler South Africa, Vogue South Africa, where that bottom photograph, that woman at an angle, is Anna. And he talks, but in those days she was Mrs. Helmut Starcke. She was his model and his muse. She modelled for Irma Stern, and there you can see that similarity in those two photographs. She modelled for Stanley Pinker, and the photograph on the right is Anna. About 2 months ago, she sat down on a chair which was in her overcrowded entry area, wearing her signature circular glasses at this time, and I thought that was quite a wonderful image. And she really got around, and people, so how did she get around? When she arrived, she started working in a bookseller and then quickly found a job in the Association of Arts Gallery. And so suddenly they were both very much part of the arts and part of the burgeoning art scene. So they would be downtown listening to the jazz, and she was known by everybody. So she certainly got into all the media until she herself started writing. But here you see her opening art exhibitions, and this is in the 1960s, where she has her daughter Stella Net in 1962. So in 1965 is when she starts coming to her professional brilliance as a stylist and a feature writer, and her name moves between Mrs. Helmut Starcke, Anna Starcke, Annelies S. Kuhn, which is her maiden name, and Anna Starcke, which she remained for many years once she got to Johannesburg. Some extraordinary pieces that I found. For those of you who would have dinner parties at Anna, there was that little Indian chest which now holds the 3 horsemen over there. And it was covered with her alcohol tray and her candles and one thing and another. And amongst the many things I opened, and there were lacquer boxes with some magazines with her memories, and others and others and other drawers and other. There was no consistency, but that box had the early works. And you can see the first item on the left. She's working with Volker Meros, who's a name I remember from the 60s as a photographer, and she's working as a stylist. Very quickly, she moves to Living and Loving in Scope and starts writing features, but her diversity runs from architectural to real-life feature, poignant features, powerful features. Here's some of her architectural features, travel writing. So this takes her right through to the end of the 1960s. And even the people pages. This was one of Jane Raffaelli's publications. And then she joins NewsCheck, their Cape Town office, as administrator and writer, because Anna wasn't going to sit quietly in a corner. And so in her words, she was the bureau's the bureau chief in Cape Town. And for those of you who remember News Check, and for those of you who don't, I mean, I think these covers are just such an extraordinary example of the 60s. But it was, for those who don't, it was a Time magazine and Newsweek type publication published locally. And I just loved this piece. I opened up all of her magazines, they were all saved, and each article she'd ever written had a bright red tick next to it, but this one I loved particularly because she found a reason to do an art and fashion piece, and I do love how she defined herself. Mini-skirted Anna Starcke, fashion checker with a typewriter, this season's most original fashion accessory. And as you would have seen, the typewriter was a big feature in her life, and the one that we have here is her red Olivetti. She moved in the 1970s to take up a position in Johannesburg in Financial Mail. The dates vary from her book that she wrote with the fly leaf, she said 1968. But she started a survey in 68, but only moved in about 1972. From design and people pages, news and lifestyle, she now moved to a series. This is a woman with no tertiary education, first language German. She moves to becoming an econo and political feature survey writer and an award winner. This was the moment she moved to Financial Mail. She did a special survey. She was a Cape Town contributor of The Rich at Play. She was very well positioned after all the people pages to go and meet up with the people she needed to meet up with and to do the feature. The piece next to it, which calls her Anne, but that must have been the copy editor because she never was Anne, and the copy reads Anne, talks about what a big thing it was to write about these big egos who got very cross with her descriptors. She then was editor of Management magazine when she joined Financial Mail until it was sold under her, which irritated her immensely, if not made her very angry. Her biggest achievement was this Financial Mail survey in 1977, for which she got that award, which is on her desk next door. And it was not just econo-political analysis, it was a forecaster. And for many, it really, really was very prescient, and that's what established her reputation. So from the 1980s onwards, she decided to leave Financial Mail and become an econo-political analyst, writing Starcke Report and Starcke Realities, forecaster, futurist, author, and advisor. And by that we mean advisor to the captains of industry, and interviewer and advisor to the political elite, which admittedly is the 1980s, so it's a very white environment with a few black faces, but in the main we're talking National Party and Bantustan politics and forecasts of that era. But interestingly, her Starcke report went on to the 2000s, and when I started reading deeply, I mean, her insights, she was an extraordinary researcher. There were files and files and files, each labeled, and most of her original archives Fitz have agreed to take, so one would be able to see them eventually. But those files had to go because it would be the Labour Institute of Race Relations, files and files and files, or CADESA, etc. And of course I couldn't miss that moment. And these are original manuscripts which I managed to find. And there's a note at the top there which I photoshopped on, but which I'll show you later. This is her book, which she was very proud of. It was interviews with the top, I was going to say opinionistas, but the leaders of our country. And again, as you see, it's the 80s, so it has a very different demographic from what we're used to today. That is her upstairs study. She had two studies. This one's upstairs. This is after some of the cleanup, but Anna's still very much there. And I just love that. It's the Kalani Gazette, but it encompasses her work of that era. As an independent consultant and business executive in the 80s, we see her getting serious about her image. Lots of photographs, headshots. She was in the Who's Who. She was a runner-up in the Women Executive of the Year. She wrote a lot of advisory pieces, feature pieces on economics and also how to manage one's money. Here we see her with that glorious telephone, which is also next door, advisor. So it's not yet the political advisor, there's this mix between financial and sort of regular people and movers and shaker people. But by the late 80s, she's considered one of the 100 cleverest people in South Africa who aren't part of the brain drain, according to Style. So from apartheid to democracy, and I talk about the captains of industry and the political leaders who they met discreetly around her lunch table. She knew how to entertain, and she invited them to her home in Killarney. So some of the correspondence includes a letter to Mandela, who wasn't very interested, but that must have been his secretary. One to one of the prime ministers of the day, which is Botha, of that day, which was Botha, etc. So Mandela rebuffed her, but she said, I'm nobody's stooge, and I'm here to just learn what you're about and provide objective commentary. But she managed without the interview. When Alvin Toffler came to this country, she entertained him at her home, and you can see some of the people who were there. So it's Tita Mboweni, Dr. Mklana, Max Dupree. And if you walk into her library, you can actually see in that middle shelf some of the photographs of the other notable people that she would meet and be photographed with, or the political elite in the early 90s. But this is one of my favorite moments. I found this just somewhere in the piles. And it was a piece of paper which was above something, which said, "This is my private shelf, and it is off limits, please." There was always a label to this effect on it. The back of this piece of paper is the first democratic government, so it was a reject piece from one of her reports. And then when we finally could make our way through the piles upstairs, we discovered that her bedroom door, which was always open, actually had this message on it. But now I'm going to track back. The start of her African art legacy. It started in 1973. She arrived in Johannesburg and took up residence in an apartment next to the Land Trust. She was walking to work, to the Financial Mail, and on her way through, she passed Totem Menegeli Gallery. And Karel will talk more about that. But as she walked past, she said there was something in the window, and it went psst. She walked in, and she said, "I want to put a down payment on that." By the end of the week, by the end of the month, she'd bought 3 items. And that was the start. So again, ChatGPT spoke about from the psst to the shrieks to the whispers and shrieks. Karel had another beautiful set of descriptors around her work, which is much more about the content, which is cultural crossover and ancestral worlds. But let me introduce you to her collection in situ. You can see Karel's piece, Ancestral Void, there in the center. The piece in the front is now at a public collection, and it's a very early Bonnie and Chalanchali from Ardmore. Faye started doing sculpture with them, Faye Halstead Burning. These I'm not going to give you background stories to, but you can see. And then there were all the others, and they just kept on and on. There was one after another. And a lot of these pieces you can see in the flesh, but I just loved collating them. And this was just one shelf which divided the dining room from the lounge, and we've got those shelving there. This was Anna in the 80s, sending out greetings from Wonderland, and she was in my skirt. This is Style magazine, African art, the big picture. Okay, I'm going to make a comment. Here's Anna and a couple of others who you would have remembered from the 80s. I think what's